Kathy had up, which I think most people think linearly like I do. And let's start at the beginning with demolition. I think there are a lot of concerns about how demolition is going to be done and what you guys are going to do to. We're really going back to the last slide. To minimize the impact. I think a lot of people saw for the first time in the New York Times article that you guys weren't going to be using barges as the FDR Memorial used, that you're going to be using. And so let's just go back through and can we just explain a little bit about what's going on with demolition, and then also energy.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Ted Musho to come up from Tishman Construction, but let me just introduce this topic by saying that we looked for ways from the very beginning to reduce the number of truck trips associated with the project, and this first bullet point here, which Ted can go into in detail, is really the most critical one, which is that we are looking to reduce truck trips overall by between 30 and 40% of the project by keeping the fill material on the site. And what that means is that we have the ability to balance out cut and fill on the site and to actually use the demolition materials of the hospital itself to build up the level of the site. All of that without trucking or barging any materials on or off site. And the reason we're doing it is really twofold. One is that for floodplain purposes, we need to raise the level of the site out of the floodplain. So we need to use the materials that are on the site to try to do that. And the second issue is from an environmental perspective, we don't want to be moving the materials around. We don't want to be trucking materials off and bringing new materials on. So the very first move that we have is to eliminate, as I said, between 30 and 40% of the traffic by leaving all the materials on the site, grinding up the building and putting it on site in order to raise the level of the site. That was our very first move. And again, let me just turn it over to Ted for some of the expertise on some of these other issues.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. I knew the guy that didn't have any slides would probably have to talk to them. So they gave me a prop, though. So, we understand your concerns. And in fact, when we were brought on the project, and this is going back to the middle of April last year, the first thing we did was started assessing what the truck trips would be. And what you don't realize at this point is when we first did this, we have a 1 million square foot building in that hospital that's on the site right now. It's primarily brick, block, and concrete with steel framing. And all of that's going to, or the initial expectation is that would have to evacuate from the site. And that resulted in essentially 60,000 truck trips, which is pretty significant. Excuse me. As we started studying it, and as Andrew had brought up, there's a number of overlaying requirements for the site relative to civil and bringing the site up to a level that the insurance and FEMA and otherwise was interested in maintaining for the benefit of the campus. And through in recognizing that datum, along with working with the civil group, we believe we have a strategy to reuse all of that construction debris on the site. So by doing that 60,000 truck trips that we first had has brought it down significantly to about, I think the number was at about 36,000.
Can you talk about per day?
Yeah.
It's really hard to get our head around.
Yeah, I mean, okay, sure. What are the hours we're talking about? How many trucks?
Well, the hours that we would be talking about is a traditional work construction day, which traditionally will start about 7 o'clock in the morning and ends about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's traditionally those work days. I see a few heads shaking, so if you want to express any concerns about that, please go ahead. I mean, the first commitment I'd like to make with you is we're here to work with you as part of the Cornell team. So, we want to hear your concerns and work with you on it.
We wish you success, and we're excited about the project. But you have a construction phase lasting 25 years. So we're going to live in a construction zone for 25 years. All construction materials, cement trucks are going to come and go off the island through this narrow main street, and where traffic is bad already. So you're asking us to endure all this hardship why don't you barge your material often on the island?
Well, as I was saying, I mean, there is the potential for that, and Cornell has agreed to study it. We're looking at it as well. The best and most, the initial impact and the best value for you and for Cornell was actually to ship this construction debris, the demolition debris off-site. And by the fact that we're keeping most of it on site, that net benefit is gone. So what we're going to be continuing doing is taking a look at the trades, concrete, steel, and on a trade-by-trade basis, and seeing if that can be accomplished and if that makes sense. See, well, you don't believe that.
I'm just saying is that you're asking us to endure this long construction phase, breathing all the diesel fumes with the trucks going up and down the main street. It's going to last 25 years. And forget about safety, about traffic. We support the project. We support it 100%. But at least you should not ask us to endure this thing for 25 years. I may not be around here for 25 years, but others will live here, and it's not going to be livable.
We should clarify, maybe Andrew could, about the construction periods. I understand your concern. Could you talk about the phases?
It's not 25 years of continuous construction. We're looking at a very targeted construction period of probably about 36 months leading up to 2017, operation of the campus for 7 to 8 years, and then another very concentrated construction period, another 7 to 8 years, and another very concentrated construction period. So it's not an a 25-year construction period.
Joyce, you have a question?
Sure. Okay. So I'm not a math whiz, but I think that 1/3 diminishment of 60,000 truck trips leaves 40,000 truck trips over a 36-month period.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of truck trips. And I'm wondering also, in addition to the huge impact, and keep in mind we have children who go to school on and off the island, 7 o'clock in the morning, heavily trafficked with children going to school. But in addition to that, have you given thought to how much of that material is toxic? You have construction that's, brick and mortar. You also have asbestos. You also have other things. What kind of investigation has gone on to determine how much of that is toxic, and how do you separate what's toxic, don't bury it in our soil, and move forward in a way that
let me take that. It's a complicated question. Nothing on the site is toxic, but there are hazardous materials in the building.
Okay.
We know there's asbestos in the building. There has been testing done, and we're going to continue to do testing. Any asbestos that's in the building will be removed prior to the demolition. And the way that works, and Ted, please fill in the details, is that the asbestos, it's completely contained, it's removed, and then it's put in containers that are sealed. And so there's certainly no open hazardous material running from the site out toward the community. Similar processes have been followed on all demolition jobs throughout the city. The city is very aggressive. They have a team that reviews it. There are inspectors on site all the time. I think we've noticed here we have dust control, all sorts of emissions controls on the site that will be employed. So we understand that hazardous materials can be scary, and that when people don't know what they are, it's even scarier. So we're committed to a couple things. One is to be in constant dialogue with the community, tell you what we're finding at the site. No work will happen at the site in terms of demolition before we know exactly what's there, before the city and state authorities, if appropriate, have inspected it, understand what our plan is, and have approved our plan. We will then talk to the community about our plan so people know what we're doing, and then we'll implement the plan. So there'll never be any mystery about what's there or how we're dealing with it. The other half of your question is about the number of trucks. And I think it's not helpful to think about it as a total number. It's helpful to think about it as a number per day. And that's what the EIS looks at. So I don't know exactly what page it's on, but the maximum number of trucks that we're looking at is in the third quarter, I think, of 2015, and it's 67 trucks per day. And so it's not an insignificant number, but when you think about it over the course of an 8 to 10 hour day, it's also not an overwhelming number. The other thing I would mention is...
Just to balance that number, and the average during those construction periods are more in the range of 20 to 30 trucks a day.
Yeah, the average number is much lower.
So we've got a peak period where we've got a quarter with 60. I mean, it's a big number, but the average number during the periods of construction...
This is literally a town with a 2-lane street, and there's a lot of kids. there's a lot of sort of stopping and starting down Main Street, and I think what Joyce is talking about, and what others are talking about, is the fear of trucks idling and that causing air pollution problems, and I think this is a major issue that Cornell has to look at.
Right. And I think we're respectful of that. I think that, again, let me just mention two more things, and if Ted wants to add too. One is that we have a unique advantage over some sites, construction sites, say in Manhattan, where we're able to time the deliveries because we have a large site that we can deliver materials to. Many sites in Manhattan, it's sort of an on-time delivery. They have no laydown space. So we do have the ability to modulate throughout the day and target areas where we may want more trucks. And second is that this is not a unique problem in terms of how to manage truck traffic and making sure that our construction managers and all the teams are not just on the site, but potentially out on Main Street and in other locations, making sure that the truck trips are done safely.
Rick, you have a question?
Yeah, have you looked to see what the impact of the truck traffic will be on the red bus schedule during the time that the trucks will be on the island?
I would ask.
You know, the analysis doesn't, it looks at total volume of traffic, and so the level of service doesn't specifically, it accounts for trucks as a larger vehicle. So yes, there's a construction period traffic analysis that accounts for the trucks in the traffic stream. It doesn't specifically account for the delay on the running time of any particular bus. I mean, it's a question, so if somebody drills down and says that's something they want thought about further, we can do that. But we look at it in sort of average travel time for vehicles. Is that clear?
Well, I think it's important to know how it's going to affect the red bus schedule because it's an essential component of Roosevelt Island transportation.
And from what you just said, so it's determined that you'll be using trucks and not barges, is that right?
No, what we've said is that from an
Because you're
let me
counting
finish.
trips per day, and so it's trucks, not barges.
No, that's not what he said.
That is not what I said.
What is
Let
it?
me be very clear.
Okay.
From an EIS perspective, which looks at the environmental impacts of the project, we have made the assumption that all of the construction materials will be delivered by truck because that is the most significant impact. We'll be looking at the possibility of barging for targeted areas of the construction if it's economically feasible and if it's physically feasible. But I can't say that we're promising to do it, but we are, from an EIS perspective, we felt that the responsible thing to do is to look at the most conservative assumption, which is traditional truck methods. We don't want to overpromise and say that we're going to deliver something when we may, in fact, not be able to deliver it.
But shouldn't the DIS, the
Environmental impact statement,
mention barging? It doesn't mention barging at all.
again, because
It
the
mentions
environmental,
trucks and
the
truck
environmental
trips.
impact statement looks at the most conservative assumptions. And the most conservative assumption is that we build this project through traditional means.
Trucks, okay.
Correct.
All right, how do you plan to respond to community complaints about the trucking?
I'm sorry.
How do you plan to respond to community complaints about noise or trucking or?
Construction in general.
No, that's a good question. So we would be setting up first of all, that you would have the ability to reach out to us anytime. We're going to be on site. So anytime there's going to be a phone number you can call for complaints. But I think more to the point, we would have a group that meets every month. That would consist of the construction management team, the contractors, Cornell, me personally, as well as other people from the team who would be able to listen and strategize with you. Part of the challenge of a construction project of this scale in a neighborhood is making sure that we're listening to you, that we're planning together, and that you understand what's coming, and so that we can try to work together. So that's a commitment that we'll make to you, and you'll see us in the community every month. We're always available to you, and we'll work together.
I mean, Ellen, I know that in the past, in my other part of my district on Manhattan, the Manhattan side, Cornell did a rather extensive construction project. And what they did was they not only set up a website, but an email address that went right to project managers that was responded to almost immediately in every case. And I wouldn't expect anything less in this instance.
Yeah, and you won't get anything less. Yeah, no, we're absolutely committed to that.
No, we'll traditionally do that. We'll make you aware of schedules, of what we're doing, when we're doing it, and provide you numbers and access to talk with us.
Did you consider having deliveries made at night, like after 10 o'clock at night, so there'll be less traffic and less people on the street?
We have not at this point.
Why not?
I'm not sure that that's the answer with people trying to go to bed and people trying to sleep through the night.
Yeah, the city won't permit that as of right. We would need to have their approval of it, and they would need your approval of that. So that would be a long process. We're not saying no, but it's not something that's standard. That's done in the standard way.
Are there any other questions? Sanjay?
Would there be any blasting or anything involving pylons and things like that?
No, right now the expectation is that the level of rock, we would be just doing it through drilling or through caissons. We've got some more investigation to do, but there's no expectation we're going to be blasting at all.
There will be other developers besides Cornell building some of your other buildings, the hotel and other buildings.
Yes.
Will the construction techniques which are agreed to by Cornell also be applied to these other developers, or could there be stricter regulations imposed upon other private developers?
We'd like to treat the whole site the same way, but again, we haven't determined that yet. The environmental impact statement looks at the development of all 4 of those buildings from an impact perspective. Does that answer the question?
Mm-hmm.
Transportation, you said that the train and the tram, there'd be very little impact. And I sort of get as far as the train, because it's like opposite traveling times, and just most of the people on your campus will be living there, it sounds like, right? So it's just spouses may be traveling during the day. Weekends, since people aren't going to work every day, the impact on the train may not be sufficient. But what I don't understand how it's figured that the tram would not be impacted. The people who are living on the campus, I think at some point would like to leave the island, and not everyone's going to have a car.
You got to remember, Vicki, when they're talking about full build out at 2017, you're talking about only 600 individuals, and they may not all be living on the island full time. And I mean, I think there is a certain amount of growth that this island already assumes, and that I've seen the transportation studies, and there's excess capacity both on the train, and I know we've had many community meetings about the F train and whether it's at capacity or over capacity, and the same thing with the expansion in the tram capacity. So remember, we're not talking about 2,000 people tomorrow. We're talking about a gradual buildup that will be 600 people in 2017.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the other thing I would say is that typically the way the EIS works, and we have some experts in the room to answer this, is the focus is on peak travel demand. Generally, transportation system is sized for the AM peak and the PM peak. And what we found is, you got it exactly right, with a lot of people living on campus. But the other piece is that the students and most of the members of the campus wouldn't be traveling during peak transportation hours. But
there would clearly be an increase in ridership on the various modes, the tram or the subway. The notion is that there's enough additional capacity. And these are really strict standards that the reviewing agency gives us. And in this case, it's the City Transit Authority and City DOT. And based on their standards in terms of how much excess, basically unused capacity there is, you could add additional ridership and not result in a condition that they would call a significant impact, that you would maintain a comfort level that they think is appropriate.
Joyce, you have a question?
Well, one of the interesting things that were mentioned had to do with the environmental impact, and it was that there were, I think, 12 total intersections that were affected. One of the very unique parts of Roosevelt Island is we have very limited intersections. We only have one street. So the reality is that you really can't assess the impact on our street by determining what has to be done per intersection. The reality is that the pedestrians are going to be largely affected by the traffic, regardless of the fact that there aren't intersections. And I'm wondering whether part of what you can study or add to the environmental impact study, or perhaps what City Council ought to be looking at, is whether in fact Cornell should be required to install perhaps lights that pedestrians can press so that they can stop traffic, or something that would ameliorate the additional traffic, but to simply identify that an intersection is the only trafficked area that would be negatively impacted would really be a fallacy as it relates to transportation on Roosevelt Island. From the time that you go off of the Helix to the time that you turn around right by Southtown, you don't have a single intersection on Roosevelt Island, but there are a lot of people crossing that street.
Yeah, we focus at the rotary points, we focus at the crosswalks.
That's not where people...
Yeah, I don't know, do we want to drill down at all, or into the traffic studies, or we've not done too much already? It's up to you folks.
Do people want to hear about the traffic studies? Is that something?
Do you want, the executive summary of the on-island piece?
Yeah, come on
I think it would be good.
Okay, Matt, I think.
Yeah,
Matt, you can
Yeah, why don't you come up?
Sure. How you doing? The traffic study on island did not show any significant impacts in phase 1, and in phase 2 there would be significant impacts at 2 intersections that could be mitigated using traffic signals. So REOC and the City Department of Transportation are going to look at approving those, and those would mitigate the impacts, fully mitigate them. At the other places you're talking about, you have stop-controlled intersections all up and down Main Street. Traffic still has to stop there, so there would not be impacts identified there for pedestrians because you always have to yield to pedestrians at those stop intersections. So, we are going to work with REOC to putting in the 2 traffic signals, and REOC and I think the community is interested in having traffic signals that will make it easier for pedestrians across at West Road and Main Street, and also at Main Street and the bridge intersection. So on island, that's the traffic impacts.
But you're clearly right, this isn't your garden variety transportation study, and because of Main Street and because of the small amount of traffic, it's different than looking at a traditional signalized intersection. It's hard, it doesn't fit the cookie cutter mold that the EIS typically looks at. And so if we try to address that, I'm sure there'll be comments on it, it'll be addressed further in the FEIS based on the comments we receive.
FEIS, can you explain what that
Final
is?
environmental
Thank you.
Marty?
I just want to make sure I understand what we're looking at here now. The environmental impact study is going to look at the entire project all the way to total build-out, or just for phase 1?
Looks at phase 1 and phase 2. Allison explained, it's a 2-phase analysis, so we look at completion of phase 1 in 2018, and we conservatively account for the full occupancy of the project, although that will happen over time, probably not till 2023 under their schedule. And then it looks at a second condition in 2038 when the full project is developed.
So yes.
Those are the
I
two.
think the answer that Vicky just got was there are only going to be 600 more people, but didn't we say a total build-out it'll be something like 5,000?
Correct. Yeah, when you account for all of the population.
But are we saying that there'll be no impact at 5,000?
The transportation agencies on the F train and on the tram do not identify that increase in ridership as a significant impact.
We're talking about 5,000 people in 2043.
What does that mean? How many more people are you going to pack on a tram? Like, what's considered comfortable? What is it based on?
There is a capacity or a comfort level for the view, and you may not feel comfortable with the judgment they make on it.
That's what I want to know.
And I don't think we want to do it now, but we can do it. You can go through the chapter and look at the capacities sort of for the different operating elements. But also, the campus is not your 9-to-5 workplace.
Right,
So
I understand
and
that.
a lot of the people will live here and will not be traveling during the day or certainly not during the rush hours.
But weekends, I'm actually thinking how weekends would be a lot more, that people would be getting off the island a lot more on the weekends than during the week. And that was really what I...
Allow me to just add 2 things. Firstly, the numbers that are in the EIS in terms of what is an acceptable level and what the capacities are numbers that we get from the Transit Authority and also from the Department of Transportation. So what Ed was saying was that we make an assumption based upon our experience, based upon what the population is going to do, as to who's going to be traveling at what periods of time.
Right.
And then the agencies that review these, and believe me, we could not include in the EIS any conclusions or any assumptions that weren't fully vetted by these agencies. And we can tell you that one of the reasons for Ed's hairdo is his whole life having.
This is what you're stooping to. Go ahead.
And
Rick, you're the guy with the gray hair.
and
Yeah.
my gray hair is dealing with those agencies. So the agencies have fully vetted all of this. But to the extent that anybody has concerns about it, the way this process works is that this is a draft environmental impact statement. It's been certified that it is adequate for public review. And a very essential part of this process of getting from here to the final ULIP approvals is our taking in everybody's comments and everybody's questions and responding to them. And in responding to them, we create this final environmental impact statement, which includes responses to the comments and also includes responding to the suggestions that are made to make the analysis better and truer. So we're not just coming up with numbers to make ourselves comfortable.
I understand that totally.
Let me suggest, and we're happy to do a work session on the numbers for the transit, but it's important to look in the transportation chapter. I know people haven't had a chance to do that yet, but there's a significant number of tables and assumptions, and it builds up. It talks about the capacity of the tram, the number of riders today, where the additional riders would come from, what hours they'd be traveling. So we'd love to have that detailed conversation with you, but I'd really encourage people to look into the numbers and the document.
Vicki, there's going to be there's a whole process here where there's going to be it's not like you're going to come up to Andrew on a random Saturday and say, hey, I read through it and here's what I think. There's an official comment period. There are going to be hearings about this. And I think what you're hearing from Cornell is if we want to create a working group around this specific issue to really sort of drill down and talk about community concerns around transportation, construction, they're willing to do that so that we get to a point where everyone feels comfortable and we're not just talking about abstract numbers that the Transportation Authority has given to them. So I think there's obviously a clear ability to work together. Let's just save it for a later date. Let's take a chance to actually look through the draft EIS and come back together and have just a working group about that. Is that fair, Vicki?
Yes, that's very fair.
All right. Dorit, you've been waiting?
Yeah, some points of information. How tall are the buildings going to be? How many stories would we have?
There are different controls in the zoning, but at the north end of the island, can we get to maybe we can get to the plan.
Whoop, wrong way. Why don't you keep talking and I'll find it.
So in general, at the north, roughly the north 300 feet?
Within 500 feet. Actually, the rendering is probably the best.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Right. So in the north portion of the island, the height limit is 320 feet, which comports to about a 30-story building, which is consistent with on the other side the final design, the final plan, as we understand it, for the Southtown building is a 29-story building. And at the southern end of the site, 280 feet is the limit, which translates into about a 25, 26-story building.
And the height of the other buildings in phase one?
Oh, sorry, the height, most of these buildings are roughly 75 feet high.
Stories.
I'm sorry, 75 feet.
No, I know, we're talking stories, not
sorry.
Five, 6 stories.
Yeah.
About 4 stories, right?
It's a 4-story building. Yeah, 4 or 5 stories, depending on how you count.
And we should note the height of the tower of the Queensboro Bridge is 350 feet. So that tall building there will actually be shorter than the tower.
The top of it.
Well, it may not look that way in the photo.
Yeah, I don't know about the wisdom of it, just my opinion. Do you really want to put such a tall building right next to the bridge? I mean, it makes sense to me to put it on the other end rather than closer to the bridge. Then you're going to have, blockage of light, sun, view, and so forth. Just making a comment.
Well, it's a good comment. One of the reasons that we put the tall buildings at the north end of the site is because in order for the solar array to work, the sun, it has to be in full sun the whole day. And so these buildings, indeed, they will cast shadow, but it will be on the roof of this building and on a piece of the bridge rather than on public open space. So pushing those tall buildings to the north, we felt, helped with the solar situation and also helps to avoid shadows on the public space.
Another question is, during phase 1 construction, are we going to have access to the southern end of the island, or this is going to totally be blocked off?
During construction?
Yes.
South Point Park.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, that's a commitment. If we didn't say it here, we're very committed to that. So during construction, people will have access through the promenades on either side of the river down to South Point Park and to the
and buses can also get down there.
Yeah, and bus service and pedestrian access to the southern island throughout the entire portion of
And
construction.
just a couple of things, if I just may. So through the whole project also, we do gonna have the promenades access open constantly.
Yes.
Besides the north-south access road that goes in between.
You'll
Meaning
be closing portions of the access
pedestrians
road.
are gonna be able to walk through the promenades at all times.
Pedestrians will be able to walk through the promenades at all times, and let me give you two caveats to that. One is we will be rebuilding the roadway, the entire roadway, so at certain portions, when we're working directly adjacent to the promenade, it may not be a good idea for pedestrians to be there. So we may either have flagmen or we would close that. But again, that's something that we would do in consultation with the community, so it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The other issue is to the extent that there would be barging for either for the demolition issue or for construction, that would happen at the edge. And so there you would have to have a significant piece of the esplanade closed for a certain amount of time in order to pass materials over it.
What do you consider the edge? I'm sorry? The edge?
Anywhere along the edge.
The esplanade.
The entire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Joyce, you had another question?
Okay, I had three things that struck me as I was listening to your, to what you were all saying. One of them is what Yuri hit upon, and that is, when they built Southtown, one of our biggest thorns in our side was the fact that the building, the first building as you were walking down Main Street, the back of that building is facing Main Street. And it basically feels as if the community is walled off from Southtown. And that seems to be similar to the construction that you've created here. And I'm wondering if there is a division between those buildings that give a sight line through the buildings.
I'm going to find the
Yeah, let
site
me go to
plan
the site
because
plan.
I actually
Yeah.
think it's the opposite.
Yeah, here's if you.
Do you want to go
this
for a
is-
different one?
Yeah, I think a little further on.
Here, take this.
Oh, sorry. If you go a little further
Yep.
on,
What is the phase one?
Yep.
there
That.
it is. Here's the site plan. So here's the tower for the Executive Ed Center, and here's the residential tower. One of the challenges here, urbanistically, and Colin touched on this, is that with the sports and recreation buildings here, which really take up the full block, there's no pedestrian or visual access through this area. So we actually took the opportunity to build some density there. As Colin mentioned, even the power plant or the utility building is here, and really these here at the corners become the main entries to the site.
Okay, so the other question I had, I saw two things that were kind of tucked away in that in your discussion. One of them had to do with a prohibition, a time constraint in terms of when the community can access the area that is by the river.
The promenade.
The promenade area.
I think you're talking about Melanie's conversation about zoning.
There seems to have been some kind of
Yeah.
prohibition in terms of the time element.
Melanie, you want to address that?
Promenade.
It's the current
Yeah.
operation.
Right now, we have access to those promenades 24/7.
Understood.
And we want to make sure that we continue to have
Yep.
access to those
Yeah,
promenades.
just because we're not taking ownership of those promenades. Those promenades remain under the ownership and control of REOC, subject to REOC's determination about how to operate
Okay,
it.
so then let me
Joyce
skip
is,
to, let me
Joyce is
skip to
talking
the
about
next.
the hours of operation on the open space.
Right, I think what you're talking about is on our site, we're committed through the zoning to 2.5 acres of open space, which city planning has asked that we impose the same regulations that are imposed on the public open spaces on Roosevelt Island generally. So we've actually been in dialogue with REOC, who have told us that some of the public spaces, the parks are open at 6 and close at
Only one. Only one.
at
All the parks
sunset.
throughout the community are open 24/7. The only
Except
park,
the South Point.
the only park that isn't open 24/7 simply because for security reasons it's remote.
Right.
It can't be. They don't have enough staff. We have public safety here. There's 37 men. Not enough staff to patrol it. So Southtown is closed down. South Point, sorry. Simply as a protection for the community and specifically for children, so that children don't go down there and create murder and
That's,
mayhem.
that's not exactly what we heard
Well,
from you,
let's-
but we will
we'll look
continue
into that.
dialogue and find out.
Okay, we heard incorrectly. But the other thing that concerns me, okay, you get 12.5 acres of land, and in the year 2037, we're going to get back 2.5 of those 12.5 acres to open space.
No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Okay. And in the meantime, it's going to be kind of a gradual ramp up to the entire 2.5 acres. What I want to know are a couple of things. Number one, in the process of building where you're only utilizing a small space, are you intending to keep the public completely out of the rest of the space that you have under construction?
I think we need to clarify some facts.
Yeah,
The
let us-
meadows. We need to clarify
again,
some
it's
facts.
a
It's
multi-part
confusing.
question,
Explain, I don't think you.
So let us clarify. I'll answer it in 3 parts. The first part is that this is the way we'd like the site to work when it opens in 2017. Until 2017, it's a construction site, it's a demolition site, it's not safe for anybody to be on. When we open in 2017, it is our intention to have these public spaces permanent, designed, open to the public as part of the project.
And if I can just add one thing there, at a technical zoning level, zoning will require that the open spaces that you see there be built at the time that those buildings will.
So,
open spaces, are you referring to all the green stuff?
Talk about what's happening on the
I'm
left.
referring at the moment to phase 1. So, as Melanie mentioned, we won't be able to get our certificate of occupancy for the buildings in phase 1 unless we create those spaces.
I'm not concerned about
Got
that.
it. Okay, so the other
I'm
piece,
concerned about that.
so we are intending to open this as a public space. I think Colin mentioned this as a meadow. When phase 1 is completed, this will be open for public use.
And is that guaranteed or suggested in the information that you've submitted?
I don't think it's guaranteed. I think there's one caveat that we need to work out with the construction folks is what condition the site will be in, and making sure that we bring it up to the point where it can be accessible by the public. So it is possible that some small portions of it could be used for storage of materials, but our intention is to open it up for public use.
And I'll tell you, Cornell doesn't want to live as if we're feeling like we're in a construction zone over time either. So everybody wants to see that as being highly accessible space.
Rick?
Any provisions being made for ferry transportation within?
You want me to talk about that? Yeah, so as you all know, so you've heard now a little bit about the EIS and the analysis on the traffic impact and technically how that's being looked at. All that being said, we know ferry has been a subject that's come up long before Cornell was here and continues to come up. We think it's a great idea. So now that we have a sense of our population, we would be more than happy to participate in a conversation about how ferry would work with other community members. We think our community would love it too. So we should be talking about it.
Dick?
Yeah, Kathy, while you're standing, a question that about another part of integration with the community that is of interest to me and I think to some others, which is that you may know that Roosevelt Island is a rather badly designed community in terms of heating. That decisions were made at the time that the island was built to use electric heating for not good reasons, and that we really have a situation in this portion of town that is not ideal in terms of energy and energy consumption. So what I'm curious about is whether there is any provision envisioned for some kind of interface between Cornell Tech and the rest of the community in terms of an integrated improvement of the overall energy consumption picture on Roosevelt Island.
Well, I think other members of the team can talk more generally about it. The one thing that certainly is an immediate positive impact is the fact that through this project we're bringing gas to the island. Now, I know there are challenges with retrofitting some of the buildings. Andrew, do you want to touch on this a little bit?
Yeah, we've been working closely with Con Ed. It's not a simple issue. As you said, the infrastructure of the island is not friendly to the modern energy issues. Our approach has been to try to increase the volume of gas that comes onto the island, and I think we're very close to making a deal with Con Ed that will do that. It will increase the volume of gas, bring high-pressure gas for the first time, which will be available not only to the Cornell campus, but also available to other buildings on Main Street, including some of the new ones. Our intention, long-term, is to try to use some of the volume of that gas to be able to generate power on the island. Right? How that would be distributed, whether it would be distributed off of our site, it's really too early to say at the moment.
Is there any potential for using this community as a kind of laboratory for the creation of conversions of the kind that will improve what goes on in this part of the community in terms of energy use, heating, air conditioning?
You know, I don't know enough about the specifics of how the energy use is on Roosevelt Island. I think the challenge that we have is if we can figure out a way, and again, for Cornell's purposes, and I'm not sure how this would translate to the community, is generating electricity on site is much more efficient, less expensive than buying it from somewhere else. So it doesn't change the underlying requirement to heat the building, to use electricity for the buildings, but it does bring down the cost and it makes it more energy efficient. So the fact that we'll have additional gas pressure on the island opens up possibilities to do that.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know enough about the specifics of what you have.
Well, it was actually in some sense more an academic question. That is, with regard
well, then we'd be very good at answering that.
Yeah, but with regard to academia, that is, if you're looking for a laboratory of a community
Yes.
that you can overhaul and turn it into an ideal situation, why not this one?
We are looking for that. And if you noticed on the slide that Kathy showed, there are 3 hubs. One of them is the built environment. And in fact, energy conservation, I think we even listed there, is one of the areas that we think technology can be brought to bear. So there will be people on campus who are studying this and very focused on it. So that's a terrific offer. And in fact, we're very interested in a couple of the other experiments, particularly the river,
the water turbines.
The water turbines.
Andrew will be done talking by the time I find the slide.
I know that was the challenge. I could have easily moved up to that.
The answer sounded good.
All right, we're good. There it is. I did it.
There it is.
Well,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, I'm a huge advocate of the obvious, which is like, let us have an access to the Queensboro Bridge, so that's going to improve transportation, pedestrian, walking, flow, traffic, pollution, clean air, whatever. So, you know, as point of information, we used to have actually material delivered from the bridge down to the island for construction, supplies, and so forth.
Right.
You guys are the engineering side of this earth. Did you ever consider it and give him some more gray hair to deal with our agencies?
We've definitely done our research on the issue. So we know about the elevator building. When it was built, it was demolished in 1970. We also did our research on the master plan that was done in 1969, which showed elevators from the Philip Johnson plan showed 2 glass elevators from the ground up to the bridge. We'd be very interested in that sort of project. It's a little out of the scope of what we're working on right now, but I think it's a great idea.
Rick, to close it.
All right. Job opportunities for Roosevelt Island residents in terms of the construction of the project and the school itself. Are there any plans for having set-asides for Roosevelt Island resident jobs?
Do you want to start with that? Well, yeah, I mean, I can start with the construction piece of it, which is that I can't answer it yet, because we're going to be working with our construction management team. We're committed, based on agreements we have with the city, we're committed to local hiring, we're committed to union labor, to prevailing wage, which translates into union labor. There are complicated rules having to do with that, but yes, we are committed to putting into place a program that tries to bring in local residents for that. And I don't have any details on that, but it's part of the underlying approach.
And that's very true for the operational side of the campus also. We are formally committed to something called Hire NYC, which basically talks about working to very aggressively train and hire people at the lower income levels. We would like nothing better than to see a lot of Roosevelt Island residents at all income levels actually being hired on the campus. And so we'll be posting jobs and we'll be working with the community to figure out how to do that.
Well, I want to thank Kathy, I want to thank Andrew, I want to thank the entire Cornell team for taking so much time. I see it's already 8:45. I really appreciate it. I'm sure they're going to stay around. If there are any extra questions, they'll be here to answer them.
And thank you for bringing us together.
And Kathy's here every day. So.
Thank you all, especially in short notice, for coming out. We appreciate it.